Hello, this is Sizwe podcast. My name is Agnes. Today I'm here with my co-host Patricia and a very special guest, and I would like Patricia to introduce her.
Hello. As Agnes has said, I'm Patricia, and today we have a special guest, and the guest is Suzanne Clover. Suzanne is my friend.
Oh.
She's a mother, she's an author, and she's a grief coach. Suzanne, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us more about yourself, Suzanne?
Well, as Patricia said, I'm a mom of 2 adult children, and I'm an author, a widow, and a grief coach.
Wow. So in my community or in my cultural background, grief is something that is more treated as personal or communal. When in my community, if someone loses somebody, the community will come together and support the person to grieve. Sometimes the old women will come, even live with you. Right. And then gradually, nobody knows. After the funeral, everybody goes their way, and you are left with your grief. Whether you overcame it or you didn't, it's part of life.
Yes.
I never knew we have a grief coach. So who is a grief coach?
Yeah, one of the challenges, I think, with modern society or Western culture is that grief is largely ignored, and we don't have not that we don't always, but there isn't always a sense of community to support a grieving person.
Yes, yeah.
And a lot of times people go through grief and they're basically left on their own. And it's a very difficult emotional time. And if you don't have family or friends or support, it can be very hard to go through, for sure.
So it has become a career where people pursue.
Yeah.
It is needed so much in this society, and I'm really proud to hear that some people are really taking it up to support. Because even for me, for example, one of the things that really hurt me so much is when I had my baby here. Back home, I had 3 of my kids, and the community was all around me. But when I had my last baby here, I felt like I was swimming in a sea. Yes. Coming out of the hospital and cooking my own food. That alone was a grief, so much grief to me.
Yes, yeah. Well, and that's an interesting point, because a lot of people think of grief just as losing a person, but there is non-death loss where you're grieving something.
The community that I had when I have a baby, and they will pamper me, and they will take care of my baby, and they will ask me to go and sleep. And the only time, after 3 months, I'll become like a puffer fish. Yeah. I will eat and sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about, there's a career coach, and there's a career therapist, and there's
counselors.
Yeah, a counselor. Okay. So how different are these these 3 careers, like a grief coach, a grief therapist, and a grief counselor?
Yeah, counselors and therapists usually are involved if there's a diagnosis that is involved. So if there's depression, or if there's trauma, or dependency or addiction, or things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's complicated with other factors, then usually you need a different professional. If you are just going through a really hard time dealing with the grief and the loss, then sometimes a coach can be very effective and helpful getting through that.
Awesome. Patricia?
And what should somebody look for in a coach?
When you're looking for a coach, there are some qualifications that you can have, but basically you want to find somebody that you feel really comfortable with, because you're going to be going into a very vulnerable and raw place with your coach, and it can be difficult. So you want to be with somebody that you really feel like you can be connected to and be vulnerable with.
Wow.
Yeah. And Suzanne, you didn't just become a coach because you just thought of it, because you've been through a journey. You lost your husband, and you ended up writing this book.
I did.
That's
yes.
beautiful.
And who's this book directed to?
So the book is A Coffee Tin Full of Ashes, and it didn't start out as a book. After my husband passed away, I just felt like I needed to write letters to him. And I felt like I needed to write letters to him for a year, just as part of my own grief journey. And so that's what I did. Every couple of days it was just like I was writing a letter to somebody. And at the end of the year, I was reading through those letters and I kind of wondered, I wonder if this can be helpful to somebody else. And so I talked to a friend of mine who is a publisher, and he read a couple of the letters, and he thought it would be a good idea and that it would be helpful for other people going through something similar. And no two grief journeys are the same, but there are some similarities that people tend to go through.
Awesome. This is beautiful. So people always say there's no smoke without fire. Should we say that your own grief has now led you into this career of becoming a grief coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So before my husband got sick, I took courses to become a life coach.
Oh.
And that's kind of how it started.
Okay.
And then while he was sick, I wasn't really able to do much of the coaching because I was busy being a mom and a caregiver, and I worked outside the home, and I had lots of stuff going on. But then after he passed away, I knew I wanted to get back into coaching, and it just seemed like a good fit to be a grief coach because I had the experience.
You have a lived experience to
and I really have a lot of compassion for people who are grieving because I know from experience that it's a really hard thing to go through.
I wanted to go over that. Like, take me through a life of a grief coach. If I call you, so the time that we are able to sit down, and what are some of the things that you would want to hear from me, and how do you work?
Well, it kind of depends where you are on your grief journey.
Okay.
If it's very fresh and raw within the first year even, sometimes what people just really need is a companion. They need somebody to talk to. And sometimes people have family or friends or a community of people around them that can support them. But not everybody has that. A lot of people live away from their families or there's just, it's difficult. So a grief companion is somebody that can just go alongside you and just listen to you and talk to you and be there for you and support you and hold a special, safe, sacred space for you.
Awesome. After
a while, though, maybe after a year or two, sometimes people find it difficult to get back into their usual routine. It's just...
And that is the time people will say, oh, get over it.
Exactly.
It's been a year and you are still doing this.
Exactly. And you may be ready to get over it, although you never get over it.
You never get over it,
But you may be ready to move on and just not know how, just feel a little bit stuck. You may need a little bit of support, and that's usually where I can help.
Wow, guys, if you just join us, this is Sizwe Podcast. And today we are talking to a grief coach. I think you've heard a lot of life coach, therapists, counselors, but this is the first time I'm hearing about grief coach. And I'm proud to meet Susan. And Susan have a lived experience, and she has written a very beautiful book, a coffee tin full of ashes. She lost her husband, and that has led her into a career. Like we sometimes when we bring guests here, they say this was amazing pain. So a pain that she went through has also given us a beautiful book, and she has become a grief coach. Patricia.
And Susan, how did you come up with the name of the book?
The name of the book, when my husband was sick, he had brain cancer, and so it was a long process.
Wow.
And we had a lot of hard conversations while he was still alive.
Yeah.
And he wasn't too sure what he wanted done with his ashes after he was cremated. He didn't want something traditional, and he kind of joked that we'll just put his ashes in a coffee tin. And then the more we thought about it, the more it seemed applicable because he really liked coffee. And so after he passed away, my children and I went to an antique store and we looked around and we found a big coffee tin that was the perfect size. And that's where his ashes are. They're in a coffee tin. So that's how the name of the book came about.
That's so beautiful. So even as we are almost tilting to the end of this show, we have a grief coach in our community. Where do we find you? Like if people want to talk to somebody like you, what are the process that someone has to go through to get a grief coach?
Yeah, I do have a website.
Oh,
it's coffeetin.ca. And so there's information
Yes,
on.
we will put it underneath this show, and then yes.
Yeah, so there's information on the website. So you can just reach out to me and we can talk and see if it would be a good fit
A
for
good
us.
fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's not like you're going to a shop. Even when you are going to a shop to buy a shoe, you buy the one that fits you.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So when you are in at that space where you need somebody to support you in your grieving. I think Patricia said something in one of our shows that when she came here, she lost her sister, and it was the difficult part of her life, even getting somebody to sit down and talk to grief. So if you are in that space, especially most of us who travel here, leave our families behind, and we grieve that we don't leave grief behind. It goes with that. But here we have the resources, and Suzanne is one of the resources that you can go out and look for, and who knows?
Yeah.
Yes, Patricia.
Yeah.
And find Suzanne's book. Suzanne, you wrote so much about your family. You were open about everything in this book.
Yeah.
And the challenges that you faced with Brian, but you stayed for how many years married?
We were married for 27 years.
Or
You don't
27?
look that old.
I got married when I was 3.
Wow.
And these are love messages. They are
the
messages
letters,
every day. Talk to us about your journey, your grieving journey, because every day seemed to be different. Sometimes we're like, oh, today is a good day, Brian.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The grief journey is, there's a diagram that is, it looks like a ball of string, and on each of the pieces of string, there's a different word. Because that's what sometimes grief is like. It's a tangle of sadness and joy and frustration and anger and disappointment and just so many things jumbled all at once. Wow. And it's just hard. Yeah. And the book is very raw. It's very real. It's exactly what I was going through on those days. Some days go well and some days don't go well. Some days
you feel like just grabbing the blankets the whole day and crying to your soul, and sometimes okay, let me go out. And so it's not like a straight path where you are class 1, you grow, you go to high school, and you graduate out of the grief. Yeah. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it comes down. And that is why you definitely need a coach.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's a long journey, and you never really get over it. Like there's always going to be birthdays or anniversaries or special days that come up that remind you of that person or whatever, whether it's a person you lost or something else. There's always going to be things that remind you. And if you have a hard time with grief, a lot of times it's because you loved that person so much. Yeah. And you can't love without, missing them or grieving their loss. Yes, it can be a really tough journey for sure. It
is.
And you were married to Brian for how many years?
Yeah, 27 years. Yeah,
27 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's a lifetime. And where are you in your grieving journey right now?
That's a good question. Yeah. Some days it's good. Because there's different things you go through. Sometimes you're really upset with that person for leaving you, and that's the person I thought I was going to grow old with, and now that person's not here. So sometimes there's frustration or anger, sometimes it is sadness, sometimes it's disappointment, it's so many things. But for the most part, I can look back now on pictures of him and us and memories and be happy about it, be happy about the times that we had together. But some days are still hard. Some days I just want that security of his arms around me. So it's not something that ever goes away.
Wow. And it is good that at least out of that ashes you found a career where you can be a real person that people can also come to and share their grief with you and find a way to walk that journey with them. Yeah. Knowing that you're not going to get over it. You're not going to graduate over the grief, but at least you'll be able to move on with life as part of some of the things that you chalk on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And on the grieving journey, you had 2 kids, older kids, and how are they in their grieving journey as well?
They're doing okay, and it's interesting and important to note that they're very, very different. and how they behaved and dealt with Brian when he was ill and afterwards was very different. And I think that's important to note, that everybody's different.
Yeah.
And just because somebody doesn't handle something or deal with something the same way as you doesn't mean it's wrong. It's
True.
just
I like
different.
that statement.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just different. And sometimes if you're in a situation where you're grieving, you may have friends or family that make you feel like you're doing it wrong. There's no wrong way to do grief. It's just
Exactly.
it's just different.
It is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it has to be, you have to experience it authentically the way you know, because it's your
It
experience.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to share this video with friends who are currently going through a lot of grief. And like last week, a friend of mine came to my house. She said, "Oh, I can't stop crying, and sometimes I feel like I'm overburdening you." I'm like, "No, I didn't even have that coach thing." But I said, that's all you can do for now.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to help a lot of people who are grieving, especially most of us who travel here and our families back home, and then you get a call that you've lost someone dear to you, and that journey is really, really hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
It is, yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to speak to people because you feel like you are burdening them.
That's exactly what
At
she
the end
said,
of the day, you are alone. So having a coach really
coach,
helps, because you know that this is my safe place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because sometimes your friends or family, they might mean well, but they just don't know how to support you.
Yes.
And so that can be hard. And like you said, after a while, you might not want to keep talking to your friends and family about the same
With that
thing.
that same
Yeah.
thing, yeah. And Suzanne has gone to learn, and she has the tools, and she is available for everyone who is going through that and needs that safe space to talk. Before we go, Suzanne, sometimes we always say, we give you the mic, and what you say right now are always the best.
Just to let people know that grief is hard, and it's hard, and it's awful, and it's one of the most difficult things you can go through, but you're not alone.
Awesome.
And there is hope, and you will make it through, and it will be okay. And sometimes you have to go through the hard part of it to make it to the other side. And if you try to suppress it or ignore it or push it away, all those hard feelings, that can make it harder in the long run. Yeah. And it really is something that needs to be, you just need to go through it. There's no over or under or around. It's just you have to do the hard work. You have to feel the emotions. And sometimes, and you can't do grief alone. There's a lot of times where you need to have solitude to process, but it's hard to do it alone.
Do it alone, yeah.
And please, people, buy this book. This book is wonderful. It has wonderful letters, and you learn a lot about marriage, relationship, family. And Suzanne, how do people get hold of you?
The website is probably the easiest, coffeetin.ca. There's a link to be able to buy the book from the website. I also do a blog, so there's some blog posts on the website and other information on there as well. And you can contact me through there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. If you just join us, we are bringing the curtain to a close, and I hope you will enjoy this session. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Suzanne, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.